Some years ago, I decided to set up a knowledge base about the way in which people could effectively exercise their rights against government bodies. I have a technical background and I'm very interested in game theory. I wanted to use my technical knowledge of statistics and game theory in combination with the law, specifically administrative law, to create conceptual frameworks that people could use to take action against corrupt government officials. With these conceptual frameworks, to develop them, you need to test them. You need to see how different aspects of it will be affected by real world conditions. We set up an organization that would essentially sue administrative bodies in a particular way. The organization would pressure corrupt government officials to initiate the transaction where they have an incentive to vilify and attack. But we would do it in a way that we're documenting everything. For the last 3 years, we've been living under constant surveillance, so we can monitor what we're doing for the purposes of the study that we are putting together. We finance this through the other businesses which were more commercial. The idea was to demonstrate certain aspects about government bodies, but also to put forward this conceptual framework. There's a socioeconomic theory called prospect theory that Daniel Kahneman, one of the greatest psychologists to have existed, came up with along with one of his colleagues, Amos. What they demonstrated was that humans exhibit three tendencies when they have to make decisions under risky situations. Those three tendencies are that, firstly, people will always be more focused on saving money that they have rather than making more money. For example, if you have $1,000 and you've received a notice from the government that you've done something wrong and they will take $200 away from you, you think that you haven't done the wrong thing and you want to contest that. But if you do some research, you realize that there's only a 40% chance in your situation that you will succeed. Let's say you have to make 10 hours of effort in order to challenge the fine. So you've been fined $200. There's a 40% chance that you will succeed. And you have to put in 10 hours of effort irrespective. So that's one situation. The second situation is, let's say you've become aware of an opportunity where if you work for 10 hours, there's a 40% chance that you will make $200 at the end of it. Between those two situations, people generally have a tendency to choose the first situation over the second one. Everything else remaining the same, people will always try to save what they have rather than make more. That's the first thing. The second thing is that when you risk things, the more you lose, the less sensitive you become to losing. There are threshold considerations. Let's say you had $10 million and you were betting on something. You've lost $7 million already betting, but you still expect that outcome to ultimately prevail. So you're more likely to put in a million more after you've lost several million compared with how keen you were to put in a million right at the start. That's because of the way your psychology works. Things will get different as you are close to losing everything for obvious reasons. But generally, if you're not too close to losing everything, the more you lose, the more you want to put in to the thing that is making you lose. If you had, at least at the beginning, some conviction in the success of the outcome that you were betting on. The third thing is a little bit more abstract. You will be vulnerable to a number of cognitive biases in respect of your decision-making process if you do not have firm information about the things that you're making decisions about. There's a few cognitive biases that go into this, but effectively, the way in which data is presented to you will drastically shape the way you're evaluating the risk of something. For instance, if you were told that you could go to a battlefield to save 4 lives, the keenness that you will display to do that will be different compared to if you're told that 50 people are going to die if you don't intervene. And if you intervene, then 46 people would die. In the second scenario, you're less likely to sacrifice yourself. Again, this is not about an individual, it's about the scenarios presented to a large group of people. This is one conceptual framework. Kahneman and Tversky received the Nobel Prize in economics for prospect theory because of the implications it has on financial markets. It explained, for instance, how the 2008 financial crisis came about. There's another principle in economics called moral hazard. The person who's taking the risk in a specific transaction is taking the risk on behalf of someone else. They're working for an organization, let's say. If they make mistakes, then the person on behalf of whom they're taking the risk will suffer the consequences. But taking the risk will be personally beneficial to them. If they take a risk and succeed, they stand to gain. But if things go wrong, then it's the organization that they represent that will suffer. It's a very problematic situation. The whole concept of incentivization in organizations is to prevent that scenario. You're aligning the organization's interests with the agent's interests. So they're more careful when they're making decisions. There's also the work of contemporary scientists. There's a book called Institutional Economics of Corruption and Reform. It's written by Graf Lambsdorff. What Graham argues is that corrupt enterprises are effectively held together by unenforceable contracts because you can't sue someone for not keeping their word when the agreement was to do something unlawful. I'm focusing on just one aspect of his work because it is relevant to what we're doing. Basically, what Johann argues is that the best way of eliminating corruption is to use methods of capitalism to create conflict between the different people engaging in corruption. And thereby, you can force them to betray each other's trust or create an impression that makes them feel that the other person is going to betray their trust. Then you can create conflict and incentivize them to turn on each other. Those are some important concepts. What I wanted to do was bring together the various conceptual frameworks that apply to transactions when people deal with government officials, and also look at how the combination of these conceptual frameworks affect the transaction. Over time, I've developed a conceptual framework. It's called the Folklore effect. In a nutshell, the purpose of the framework is to help make better decisions about how to deal with corrupt officials. It's only applicable in very specific contexts. Let's say in a particular scenario, the officials who are dealing with person A have a duty of care higher than the common duty of care. For instance, when someone owes a fiduciary duty, they cannot have a conflict of interest. That's basically the defining feature of the duty. There are some transactions in which government entities have something similar to a fiduciary duty in particular contexts. An organization that is authorized to get information from you or seize information from you for a particular purpose cannot then use that information for any other purpose, even if it is capable of incriminating you in some other way. Where you have a situation such as that, and the entity takes adverse actions against person A, and person A has documentary proof of the organization's improper actions, corrupt officials who are vulnerable because of the evidence that the person has are likely to take more adverse actions to vilify them and destroy their credibility. They'll continue to do that until they effectively silence that person, or people are not likely to listen to them or to take their assertions at face value. In the process, they will commit more unlawful actions. Even though they're exercising institutional authority, they're acting as individuals because the institution is a concept that the law defines. They can't do anything unlawful by definition. So If you have a judge sitting in a matter and they're taking a bribe to judge the case in a way incompatible with the law, or to give a party an advantage or whatever improper purpose motivates them. The position at law is not that the judge has taken a bribe in his or her official capacity. It's that the person who's supposed to exercise the role of a judge has stopped exercising the role of a judge and is now doing something wrong for their personal benefit. And the moment they start doing it, they stop being a judge. A judge couldn't do that as per the definition of what it means to be a judge. What that means is that the institutional frameworks that protect them don't protect them anymore. The people who are supposed to cooperate with them are not obliged to cooperate with them anymore. That's the theoretical standard. In real life, even if people realize that government officials are doing the wrong thing, they will continue to cooperate with them. In most Western liberal democracies, corruption doesn't exist because people want to make a career out of being corrupt. It's not something people generally plan. What normally happens is that people who have discretion and it is convenient in some circumstances for them to break the law for personal benefit, they get tempted and they do the wrong thing. Mostly, any subsequent corruption is basically them trying to falsify other things to keep the truth from coming out and to prevent the consequences of their actions. A lot of people are sympathetic to them because they think that the person made a mistake and is not generally wrong. They will try and help normally because it's just the way the organization works. It's particularly the case in organizations like police forces, where people are working together in a situation where they have to be a team against people that can harm them. And it's a very rigid hierarchy, and they have to work closely together at all different times. If you're not cooperating with each other, it's not going to be good. Because most people cooperate, the few people that don't, they will be in trouble. But because of the way the legal system is built, the more adverse actions that they take, the more they have to lie to justify their actions. Ultimately, whatever adverse steps they're taking, they will need to justify them to harm the person permanently. They will have a tough time doing that because they have to demonstrate things beyond reasonable doubt. If the person hasn't done anything wrong, it will be very difficult for them to demonstrate that. If they manufacture evidence, the evidence will often lack quality. For instance, if they're trying to incriminate someone in an offense that occurred 4 years ago, they would not have contemporary evidence to demonstrate that person had done something wrong 4 years ago. They would only be able to produce circumstantial evidence. And the way in which they will produce the evidence would normally show that it's produced or it's obtained at least from a source which they had some control over. Let me give you an example. Someone is carrying a plastic gun because they were attending a costume party and they are a certain racial profile. For whatever reason, they have an interaction with the police. The police officer sees the plastic gun. They have a bias and they preemptively shoot them because they suspect that the plastic gun is actually a gun. Basically, if they shoot the person in circumstances where the person wasn't doing anything wrong, to justify what they've done, they would have to plant a real gun on the person. If the person hasn't died, it would create problems for them because they could prove through documentary evidence that they weren't carrying a real gun. For instance, wherever they were before that, the people there could testify, or if there was a camera there, it would have caught them carrying the toy gun. The more the person who has been shot tries to take action against them to prove that they have done the wrong thing, the more they have an incentive to charge that person. That creates attention. The more interested the person is in vindication, the more the organization has an incentive to blame and vilify them. The problem is that the more they blame that person, the higher the requirements will be for them to demonstrate that they have a proper suspicion. So if they're saying that it was necessary for the person to be shot, and if they were shot more than once, it wouldn't just be enough for them to have the gun. They would also have to say that they were about to discharge it at them and so on. What they have to do to make a more formidable case is put some distance between themselves and the way in which the evidence is collected. So they recruit other people to cooperate in their conspiracy to frame the person. And in order for them to do that, they have to exaggerate the faults of the person. What they're trying to do is create an image of that person, which is a gross distortion of the truth. The more there is a reason for them to lie, the more exaggerated the tale will be. That's why the term folklore effect comes from. Ultimately, the only way they succeed is if they're able to prevent the documentary evidence from coming out. If it comes out, then because of the extreme difference between the truth and what the evidence will show and what they're saying, it will be impossible for them to even justify that they made an honest mistake. And all their transactions and communications and things would be recorded, because that's how modern systems work in all government departments. All of that can be retrieved, and even if they have deleted or kept specific things from getting recorded, the tendency, the nature of transactions and when they're taking place, coupled with the circumstantial evidence that will be collected, would be conclusive of their guilt. For instance, if they're making calls to each other and asking each other to meet in person, so they don't have the incriminating stuff recorded on phone calls, the records of the calls they make to organize the meeting will show that they were interacting sometime before they made common statements about something. Once you cross a certain threshold, the people who are incriminated by the evidence have to prove that they haven't done the wrong thing. If you're a government body and there's evidence that you may have done the wrong thing, then you have to produce the records to prove that you haven't.